Welcome to the Lee Schools TV podcast. We are excited to be back from our summer hiatus, if you will. And I'm Adam Wright with Lee Schools TV, and we're very excited about our guest today, Ken Savage, Executive Director for Strategic Sustainability and Governance. Ken, thanks for being here.
Pleasure to be here, Adam.
All right, before we get started, just want to mention you might notice that we've got some new equipment, some brand new microphones, and some boom arms. Just to clear the air, privately donated, so no cost to the taxpayer, which is cool. And yeah, we are excited for our new season of podcasts. And just a quick reminder, you can find the Lee Schools TV podcast on Apple Podcasts, SoundCloud, and the video version is also on Facebook and YouTube. So, all right, well, let's get started. Ken, how you doing, man?
You know, life is good. I feel very lucky every day. Every day I have to pinch myself. So, yeah, I feel great. It's happy to be home back in Lee County.
Welcome back to the School District of Lee County. So, real quick, you've been working for the last year. Before coming back to the district, you worked for the State Department of Education.
That's right.
And before that, you were the principal of James Stephens International Academy. And you helped turn that school around in a very short time. It went from an F to a B under your watch.
That's right.
So that kind of paved the way for you to work for the state. So real quick, can you just kind of talk about what you were doing, what your title was with the State Department of Education before you came back here to the district?
Yes, I was a member of the Chancellor for K-12 Public Schools Cabinet. So it's a very interesting thing. There's 4 of us on Cabinet there, and a number of different. It's a broad purview of what the state is required to do. Basically, everything that touches K-12 education, we have the state level responsibility for that. It was a mind-blowing experience. I just can't say enough that in a single year's time, I really feel like I learned about 10 years worth, which is humbling to admit because, after, a pretty long career in education already and having been in a number of seats on the bus, I've worked in all levels. I've been a leader in all levels. Having been a teacher in a number of different subject areas, I've taught in other cities. I have a lot of experiences in education. I have my master's, my doctorate. I've studied a great deal about education, but the state experience was just one of the most amazing experiences of my entire professional and personal life. It was quite an adventure to go on. And I got to see a change in leadership at the top, got to be there for one commissioner, passing the torch to another commissioner, from one governor to another governor in the seat for politics for the whole state of Florida. So it was a pretty mind-blowing thing to be behind those closed doors, to hear those conversations, to understand what people were thinking about and all the different things that go into all the decisions that are made at a state level. Additionally, I had the chance to get to know people across an agency of over 2,000 employees that really their decisions and their support touch every child and every worker in the state of Florida. And so it's a tremendous responsibility, but I got a chance to meet a lot of the rank and file folks as well as all the bureau chiefs and executives at the state level and work with them. So I in a short time, I had a very neat seat on the bus, very similar to kind of the seat on the bus that I have here. The Chancellor of Education at the time, who was then Chancellor Lyons, when he kind of pitched the concept for the role that they created for me at the state level, he said, "Ken, we're a very siloed bureaucratic institution, and that in some cases builds expertise. People in their lane really know a great deal about their lane. They know the law, they know the policies, they really get to know it very well. But most of what happens is integrated, and you have 2 people working very hard who are completely unaware of what the other one's doing, and that leads to inefficiencies, it leads to duplicate work, and it leads to communication problems and just efficiency and effectiveness problems." And when Dr. Atkins talked about the role here, it was very similar to that in the sense that you have these very strong divisions with strong infrastructure, but in a school, as a principal, you have to learn how to integrate across all your workflows. You really have to. You can't allow people to become too bureaued, segregated in their kind of approach. You have to constantly be maximizing your resources, and so it kind of trains you to think a little differently when you get to the large bureaucracies of how to help in that regard. So that's what I did at the state level, and now coming here, I get that. One of the things the Superintendent Atkins said to me was, Ken, I have 7 bosses. I've got a huge district of children and parents and community people that need this district to continue to improve and move forward. But I've got a lot of bureaucracy and a lot of politics and things like that can stand in the way. So I want you to help make sure that the most important work always moves forward, that we don't get lost and sidelined for the important work. The important work has to move forward. And that's something that I get to focus on important work, things that are of the most importance to the superintendent, and just ensure that we don't allow those things to drag. We keep them moving.
So yeah, we'll dive into that a little bit more in a
great.
second. But had you always wanted to come back to Lee County, or was it something that you weren't really expecting? I know we missed you here, and that Dr. Atkins wanted to bring you back. Did the district kind of actively recruit you back, or how did that work?
Oh, that's a great question. Yeah, so it was kind of a unique journey for me, how it kind of unfolded. And I would say that I had a number of different opportunities to continue. After being principal a year, you have a lot of people who are reaching out to you to try to recruit you for something. And the state role was specifically to create a job directly for me to contribute at that level while learning at the same time was really, to me, a once in a lifetime opportunity. And so I never really anticipated that it would be a very long-term thing. I thought at most maybe 2 years, unless I fell in love with it. That's a possibility. You get to a new seat on the bus that you've never had before, and maybe you see, wow, I really like this side of it. But as much as I learned and as much as I grew, I think I really understood once I was there pretty much what it entailed. And if you're the kind of person who just loves to read statute every day and loves to analyze policy and things like that, then yes, that's probably the best seat on the bus for you. And some of the people that are there are just phenomenal folks, really brilliant, talented people that love to do that work. But for me, I knew that being far away from students, is not, that you have to have that impact too, that you really know. And for that year while I was up at the state, there are no kids anywhere. You're in a building of over 2,000 people, and it's multiple stories. You're spending a lot of your times in meeting rooms and hallways and elevators. But the most joyous moment you get is when you get to go out and visit with people who are in the field. You get to visit with principals, you get to visit with superintendents, you get to visit with teachers, kids in buildings. Whenever you get that chance, then it kind of reminds you what all of the work is really about. And so I think while I was there, and I certainly was put to good use while I was there, there was a lingering part of me that felt like, if I keep doing this at this place, that's going to take me down a path that maybe isn't necessarily the seat on the bus that I want. And so the unique opportunity provided by Dr. Atkins is that I get a similar level of, a lot of the things they asked me to do are very similar to what I'm asked to do here, but it really is applied. I really know I'll get to see the impact in kids and in schools and in the community. And it's a community where my family lives. My parents live here. My wife's parents live here. My brothers work in the school system. We're all educators. If you hear the name Savage, I guarantee you there are Savages everywhere. We multiply. And we just love this. This is not just a job. This is what we're all about. You should come to our family gatherings. It is pretty boring for non-educators because we just yap about education stuff. It's what we talk about. All our friends do it. So
was that an open invitation for me to come to a Savage
absolutely.
family gathering?
I would love to have you. In fact, come to we're going to be going to a Cleveland Browns game this year, but we watch the Browns every Sunday, and there's never a better insight to watch the Savage family than when we're engaged in watching a football game. And my brother will usually my youngest brother have a laptop out where he'll be typing on, formative assessments or things like that. And so on the commercial breaks, we'll be talking about education things, then back onto football. So, it's a very interesting experience. You're welcome to come.
Yeah, sounds like fun. So are you originally from Ohio?
Yes. Yeah, I'm from Cleveland originally. That's where I was born.
And you came to Florida when?
I actually came down as a 5th grader in Lee County, and I was at Villas Elementary. My first principal was a guy named Jim Donmoyer. And it's funny, he had a picture of me when I played the Scarecrow in The Wizard of Oz in a show down here as a 5th grader, right when I came down. And he saved my picture, this little photo of me, many, many years, because a long time later, I came back to Lee County for my administrative career, and I became an assistant principal at Cypress Middle. And when I did, he was one of the very first phone calls of someone to congratulate me on working, becoming an administrator. And he was in his last year, I think, and he retired shortly thereafter. But he saved that picture and he gave it to my boss, and she held that as leverage over my head, this little embarrassing photo of me. But it just shows that when you're part of a community, it's not just a job. For him, it was personal. He was a big part of this community, and I think for me, when I retire, I would love to know that I spent my entire career serving a community. And I think that's a big reason why we came back. I had some other good opportunities to go and work in other states and bigger titles and more money and things like that. But the reality is, like, at the end of your life, what really matters are the people, more than the money, more than the titles, more than the acclaim, awards, and all that stuff. That really doesn't mean a lot to me, which is ironic, obviously, I know, having some of those things. But what really matters to me are the people. And that's not just my family, but like friends and colleagues. And, you just really, if you're going to put all this time and energy in, you want it to be with people that you love and respect. And that's why we came back.
All right. Yeah, it's a great community to be a part of. So you're back with the district. And once again, you're the executive director for strategic sustainability and governance. Mm-hmm. It's a brand new position at the district. Mm-hmm. What are you laughing at? The mouthful?
Yeah, it's a mouthful.
So I've got in my little notes, what does the EDSSG do? The Executive Director of Strategic Sustainability and Governance. So the position created basically for you, right?
Mm-hmm. That's right.
So you mentioned that it's your job to kind of make sure that we don't lose sight of the big picture stuff and the main priorities. So what would those be?
Well, I mean, the number one thing is student learning, right? Student learning is the whole reason we operate. I mean, obviously, we need to keep kids safe. There are so many other things that go with it. We need to make sure kids are fed. We need to make sure our staff are well supported. But at the end of the day, if kids aren't learning at the highest levels, that's really what schools are here for. And while that sounds like a pretty straightforward mandate, it's not quite as easy as you think, because you have one of the biggest issues facing Lee County is equity, right? So it starts even before kindergarten. So let me give you an example of kind of what I mean by that. You have children who walk into kindergarten who already can read, which is essentially one of the key things we want them to be able to do by the end of kindergarten.
Yeah.
But you have kids who can read, and they can read maybe in some cases like first or second graders. I mean, so they're coming in essentially way ahead of the game. Meanwhile, you have other students who are coming in who've not had any kind of early learning experience outside of this kindergarten experience. They're 5-year-olds in most cases. Mm-hmm. And they're coming to the table never having been in an organized setting, never, having to follow rules in the way that we would think, or being a part of a structure like that. Some of them are coming from environments where they haven't been nurtured, so that there's a lot of hurt and suffering that they've endured, even though they're very young lives. A lot of times it mirrors with socioeconomics, which is a real challenge in our society, not just here in Florida and Fort Myers, but everywhere. Mm-hmm. And so, a big through line of education is that what we want it to be is a gateway so that children and families can have dreams, that they can have things they want to achieve, they can have dignity and live dignified lives. And education can be that equalizer, and it's why we continue to invest as it, why it's such a priority for states to prioritize their educational setting. But here in Fort Myers, we really get to see that play out. We have families that come from really at-risk backgrounds, and we have to educationally figure out, okay, how can we help students who are coming at that same level as kids who can already read, kids who don't know any of their letters and have never seen letters before? How can we rapidly get them to a level that's fair for them and that allows them to eventually get to a level where they can be, graduates and go on to live productive lives and be contributing members of society in a positive way? And really, that's our charge. So, and I've taken that charge very personally. My family does too. We're very invested in that charge, but it's complicated. And so to support the superintendent in that regard is really one of my key pieces. So how do you do that?
Yeah.
Well, one way that we do that is really with data. So you probably heard data so much that I hate even mentioning the word because it conjures up numbers and all these things. But really what data is all about is evidence, right? And evidence, we make evidence-based decisions all the time without even realizing it, where we kind of interpret data in ways that, that are so, you wouldn't even realize it. Like a good example is when you're driving down the road. When you're driving down the road, you are instantly gauging your speed. You're kind of looking at your dashboard to see kind of how fast your car is going. You're glancing out the window to see the speed limit sign, looking at other cars in proximity to you to kind of, okay, well, yeah, it's 45, but all these cars are going over 50. You're making a lot of these judgments quickly and in real time based on all the information you have available to you. And that allows you then to try to keep yourself safe, to figure out where you want to go and all those things. Well, the same thing we do in education. We are constantly looking at all the evidence we have to try to make informed decisions about kids and about their rate of learning and whether they're struggling at it or not. And what do we do about it? Teachers are looking at that kind of evidence. Principals are looking at that evidence, and the district's looking at that kind of evidence. Parents are looking at that kind of evidence. We're all doing it. And because it's so important to get that right and to look at the best evidence and to look at the best things, that's a big part of my role, is to try to help, with that, try to figure out what could we look at to accurately know, the value we're really adding to our kids in our system, so that, the kid who came in already reading is being sufficiently challenged. It's not fair to just, not push that child who already came in reading. Mm-hmm. We need to continue to push that child, but we also have to individually reach the child who really was not ready for this experience yet. And so that individualized path, and what that looks like at scale is a big part of, something that I'm contributing on right now.
So are you mainly focused on the early years, or you kind of go through K through 12?
It's K through 12.
Yeah.
So I get to work across the entire organization. The same way the superintendent is deployed across the entire, every kid, every level. There's no one that's more significant to him. It's really important. I get to basically be right there with him. Whatever we need. I think there is a lot more attention needed in the early learning. Yeah. And part of that is because we as a district, essentially we have an obligation once they hit kindergarten. But we know that the issues begin before kindergarten. And so part of it is, are we a strategic partner in engaging all the people who have a similar interest and a similar resources, and a similar mandate, that they, they're from a government standpoint, from a nonprofit standpoint, from a business standpoint, and from a community standpoint, there are so many people engaged in that conversation. So how do we as a district fulfill a key role in that partnership to make that go forward?
So I know you're still new to the position, and so you are probably you still have a lot of work to do. But have you already started collecting data? So once you have all this information, what do you do with it? How do you implement some kind of strategy? What's kind of the end goal?
Yeah, that sounds like something the superintendent would ask too. One of the things that he's the term he doesn't want analysis paralysis. Mm-hmm. You don't want the data to be overwhelming. Similar to like the car analogy, right? Like you don't want to be overwhelmed by the amount of information around you. It needs to be just enough for you to make the right decision, but not too much that it overwhelms you. And so that's a big part of what I take on as my responsibility is, I, having been a principal at the different levels, having been a leader at the different levels, having been in these things, I have a pretty good sense of the information that I would have liked to have had when I was in those chairs, or the information I had to try to create, right? Mm. So because I know that, and because I've talked to teachers who are, in that kindergarten trenches all the way up through high school seniors and whatnot, I do have a sense of, some of the things that they would like to have. And so part of what I try to work on is developing a model that gives each client basically exactly what they need to know. So for example, I will be able to tell a high-performing school, a school that's maybe a perennial A school, they are looking at their paper and they're thinking, we're an A school, where do we have to improve? Well, I can very precisely show them, well, you're an A school, yes, but a lot of that's because your kids came in already reading. Yeah. And so their scores are going to be pretty high. But here, when you compare yourself to other high-performing schools or serving a similar group of students, your kids aren't growing quite as much as their kids are. So aren't you curious about, what are these other schools doing? Sometimes they're local schools, sometimes they're schools around the state. So it's kind of framing their performance so that they are curious about how they can be better. Meanwhile, when you go to schools that are like DRF schools, there's already a sense of urgency there. There's already a school that knows that they could get shut down, similar to like what we had at James Stevens, or before that Dunbar High School where I was at. Some of these turnaround experiences that I've had, they really stay with you. But I would also argue that some of the schools I've worked at or been the principal of, where it wasn't necessarily a turnaround environment, it can be very difficult to have a sense of urgency where people come to work and realize, wow, I have a lot more to do. That while we think we're an A or B school, we really could be much, much better than we are. And I think that's a healthy level of urgency that kind of honors all aspects of our community. We can't just focus on DRF schools, because that's not really addressing the type of improvement we really need as an entire system.
Mm-hmm. So you're able to, or you'll be able to, once you have all the data, kind of pinpoint exact instances or problem areas to improve
That's right.
schools of all levels across all socioeconomic lines.
That's right.
Cool.
Yeah.
Is there anything else, big picture, that you're working on, or is that?
That's a student learning side of it,
Yeah.
and I'm not doing it justice. There's a whole lot to that side of
Yeah.
it, but the other piece is just to work across the entire organization. Like right now, I'm working on a number of safety and security related things too. Because we can talk about learning all we want, but if kids aren't safe, we failed. So that's something that we take very seriously as a district, because just like when you're a parent, the only thing you really care about as a parent is to keep your kids safe. All the rest of it's gravy,
Yeah.
but keeping them safe and alive and well is really the thing that keeps you up all night. When you're a superintendent, or when you're leading a district or leading a school, the only thing you think about, it haunts you that this is all on your watch, and the policies you come up with, the procedures, the people you hire, all those things. Even if one child is critically injured or dies, you never forget that. You just never forget it. Even if it had nothing to do with you, it just becomes a level of responsibility you take on. So I'm working on some safety related things right now to address some of those very real issues, and just a whole number of things. That's one of the benefits of, while I was at the state and while I'm here as well. In prior years, you might, and a lot of people have a very specific area they focus on. I get to really focus wherever the greatest need is, and wherever our superintendent really believes it's a significant priority, whether it's a short-term priority or a long-term priority. I get to drill in on those particular areas, and that's pretty gratifying work.
Are you able to talk any specifics about the safety things you're working on, or is it a little too early to discuss?
Well, some of it has to do with compliance related to state law. So we have something called the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas Commission. It's people who follow kind of politics and kind of follow that pretty. It gets a lot of notoriety. Mm-hmm. And while political things aren't always the most interesting, because they're serving kind of some other interests sometimes, they can be kind of used in ways, for people's political careers. The reality is, what it's really about at its core is about, being proactive and keeping kids safe. And that I can get on board with, that any of us can, is trying to see not the noise, but what's the core concept beneath it. And I think I'm working on a number of things that to help to us to ensure that what we're doing is both correct in the letter of the law, as well as intentionally protecting our community, our kids, and our staff, to be honest, too. It's not just our kids, it's our staff. That we're living in a very volatile time. We're living in a time where, school shootings are far more prevalent than they've ever been. That's scary. That is scary as a parent, as a school leader, as a person who worked in schools, as a teacher. The fact that we have to worry about those things is just something that is a sign of where we're at right now as a time. And yet we as district leaders have an obligation to say, what can we do to keep people safe? And so that's where I get to, help troubleshoot. I get to help make sure that we're following the letter of the law, but also doing things that are really good for all of our people. So
let's step back a little bit and talk about kind of your beginnings with the district. And you've had, obviously we mentioned you were at James Stevens. Principal of the Year, like you mentioned earlier. I'm sorry, I forgot to kind of add that to the beginning of your
Please.
introduction.
You don't ever have to say it, I promise.
You mentioned Cypress Middle, Dunbar High School. So so you moved to Lee County in 5th grade, you said.
That's right.
And then you went to Villas.
Then from Villas Elementary as a 5th grader, I went to Dunbar Middle, which is actually not the Dunbar Middle that we currently have, but where the campus of Dunbar High School is, used to be a middle school. And I attended there for 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. I was part of the gifted program, which was we were in portables on the campus. It was my first experience here in Lee County with kind of the magnet and starting to understand the segregated nature of our community and some of those things. We were bused down there. It was before Veronica Shoemaker existed. So we'd ride in a bus and literally cross the other side of the tracks and go into a school. It really was very powerful in terms of shaping me and the things that I would one day care about, that at the time, as a child, I really didn't understand, really. It just was kind of part of that experience, that background. Then I went to Cypress High School from there and graduated locally here. And then I went off to undergrad at Florida State University for my undergrad. Yeah. And then I did my master's and my doctorate at University of Florida. Yeah, see, there you go. You're like my wife and my brothers. They're all Gators. But I'm still a Seminole at heart. I've certainly given the University of Florida more money. And I actually am a professor there too. So I'm teaching.
Yeah, I had that. I was going to ask you about that.
Yeah,
you're teaching a master's class?
A master's at leadership course. So one of their courses, it's about organizational leadership, which is pertinent considering the last 2 jobs that I've had now have been very much large organizational leadership roles. So an executive director now, an executive director in the past. The state level purview really is cool because you get to see higher ed, you get to see nonprofits, you get to see national, the federal side, you get to see state government. I mean, you really get a broad understanding of that. So it's been cool to not just bring elementary, middle, and high school and district experience, but state experience to that course as well, and to help those, to help challenge our next group of leaders coming. So yeah, I went through that kind of higher ed path and back to Florida State. I did not set out to originally be in education. I actually was in film school. So this kind of setup for me of where we are right now would have been much more exciting to me. And actually that kind of started even in middle school. We started with, journalism and TV production, and I was the anchor in our high school, so I got to be the daily voice.
You sound like me.
There you go.
That's
and
how I got
loved
started
it.
too.
I enjoyed it, and I actually really enjoyed film school. It was cool. Florida State has a pretty prestigious film school in that circle, and they don't take a lot of people. And the reason why they're so highly sought after is because they pay for all your film. Whereas if you go to like NYU, you, at least at that time, I don't know if it's still that way, you had to buy all your own film. And now, of course, with digital media, it's a whole nother world. But back then, when I was in film school, we actually had real cameras with film cameras,
Yeah, what is
film exposures.
film?
I, of course, having gone through the video world, I had no idea, that you actually were exposing film and recording the audio separately and then merging them together. And so I learned all those things in film school. And, while I was in film school the first couple of years, because I had all my prereqs taken care of. I did a lot of advanced learning when I was in high school. So I came to college basically with my first 2 years already done. So I got to jump right into the major and go to and shoot film all over the Panhandle and all over campus. And they asked, what is the job you want? And I thought, well, I'd love to be a director. And they said, okay, well, if you want to be a director, the best way to do that is to be a writer, to write screenplays and things like that. And so I thought, okay, what's a career that I could get that I could write and, in my off time? I thought, teaching. That'd be perfect. You teach 10 months out of the year. You could spend your summers writing.
Yeah.
I love to coach sports. I coached basketball and football. I really enjoyed that too. So I thought, it's a win-win. I can teach something. I like all the subjects, so we'll see what that is. But I'll just write my screenplays, and if one of them gets picked up, I'll get a chance to be a director. So I switched into education strictly as a practical paycheck, so I didn't have to just go work on a film crew out in California or something.
So did you switch majors?
I did. Right after
your
my
undergrad?
After the first 2 years, I switched over to education because that's kind of the time when most people actually get into their major is by their junior year.
Yeah.
And so for me, that was like, great, I get to jump into a major. I'm not behind at all. But, of course, when you actually become a teacher, you realize it's not like that. And I think, and when I coached, and so of course there were no screenplays being written, there was no downtime, and
Not even during the summer?
no, because even the summer as teachers, you're really working. If you're trying to be any good at what you're doing, you have to keep working at it. You're really analyzing what went wrong, what went right, trying to get better, and yeah, it's too. You take some time off, but a lot of our best teachers, if you go out there and talk to them, there's no such thing as a real summer, not to the way that it's perceived maybe. And so I really, I kind of fell into education a bit. And at the time, I wouldn't say that I really loved it. It just didn't feel like, I really wasn't sure where my seat was on the bus, but I was pretty sure education wasn't it. And so then I went to law school. And while I was in law school, I still taught. I taught during the day. And at nighttime, I would do this law degree. And I was in Jacksonville in an inner city school. So this is the first time I ever worked in a really tough school. And it was a failing school. And, here I was at nighttime. I was sitting next to a vice president of Bank of America who was only getting his Juris Doctor to make, $100,000 more or something. He could move up in his organization at Bank of America. And then during the day, I was working with kids in the most intense poverty and violence in the city of Jacksonville. It was in the most high crime area, and it was a failing school. And this was a 97% African American school, and it was 100% poverty school at that time. And I just couldn't. These kids were just like me. And that's the part that finally got me. I was seeing these kids who just they weren't born with the privilege that I was born with. And they were in a community where, they just didn't have a lot of resources, and they really didn't have a lot of advocacy. They didn't have people looking out for them to keep them on track. And what really struck me was the kids didn't even really have dreams. If you'd ask them what they wanted to be, most of the boys would just say an NFL player or a rap artist. It's because that's all they knew. Most of their families weren't employed and things like that. And their families were very fractured and things. And I realized that not only, most of them didn't even play football. So to say they want to be an NFL player when they didn't even play football is kind of absurd to say something like that. But it just kind of gave me insight into the fact that there were larger issues in our communities that needed to be addressed. And to me, that's all of a sudden, from that moment on, I knew maybe not exactly the job that I would have, but I knew the mission that I was on. And I would be using education as that vehicle to really try to be a vehicle for equity, so that kids who just happen to be born in a particular area, in a particular situation, can actually have very real dreams, and that they can, I want them to have dreams. I don't care where, what family you're born into, you should have the right to have dreams, to be able to pursue those dreams. And so I have become an advocate agent for that, to support that in my career. And ever since, the energy that you see me have and things like that, that's all. It's not coffee. I mean, I drink coffee too, but it's because that passion for that really just kind of set me on this path, and it makes me excited to wake up every day and do that work.
So where did you say that school was?
It was in Jacksonville. And unfortunately, the school was shut down. It was a failing school for too long, and eventually it was reconstituted, and then a different campus somewhere else was moved onto that physical campus and became 100% magnet. At that time, it was a neighborhood school, and it was a very real struggling school. Like, to give you an example of what kind of conditions it was like, just because I think it's one thing to say a failing school, it's a whole other thing to actually see what that looks like. I was a teacher, right, and I had anywhere from 22 to 25 kids in my class. At least 2 days a week, an administrator would walk in another class of kids for a 90-minute block and sit them on the floor. So I'd have not just my 22 kids, but 22 or 25 additional kids who I didn't know potentially sitting on the floor in that room while I would try to teach. This is 2 out of the 5 days a week. And then
why did he bring them in?
Well, because they couldn't get teachers to come to the place, and they couldn't get subs. You talk about a place, that is such a high crime area and such a high poverty area, you're dealing with a lot of other issues, and they just couldn't get people to come work there.
So you had to teach like 50 kids?
Yeah, and who knows what? I mean, they didn't bring them in for my subject area. They could bring them in. They may have been in math class and their math teacher's out. They just bring them in and sit them on the floor. And then one day out of the 5 days, they'd bring in a third class.
Oh, wow.
And so I'd have almost 100 kids. I mean, 75 kids.
How'd they even fit in there?
There was just enough room for me to stand in the front of the room.
Wow.
And then the rest of them on the floor. And I mean, imagine think middle school age kids for 90 minutes, 75 kids 2/3 of which I might not know them. I mean, that's the kind of thing that just grips you, and it makes you think like, this isn't a third world country. This is the United States. This is happening. And if that were to happen here in Lee County, people would be at a board meeting. I mean, they'd be raising up the alarm, but there was no alarm being raised. This just went on. And when you live with that kind of duality where you've got this really affluent kind of clientele being served in a law school by night, and you've got this other side of the world, in your community being really underserved in a way that is borderline criminal to me, we have an obligation to do something, a moral obligation. And that's what kind of got me and just kind of catapulted me. So that hopefully gives you a little more clarity of what I was referring to.
So when did you come to work in Lee County schools?
So at that moment, after that experience, that's when I went to University of Florida, switched over to what they had as a joint Juris Doctor and Master's Ed Leadership.
Okay.
Again, the job wasn't, that kind of prepares you if you want to be like a school board attorney and things like that. But I really chose more of the practical side, which, takes you on school-based administration. And so I did that in Gainesville while I was teaching too. I was still getting my master's there. And then when I became an administrator, once I finished my degree, I came to Lee County because it's one of those things where when you become an administrator, a lot of it is networking and getting to know other administrators and building those relationships. And so it made sense because my family lived down here to start my administrative career down here. So, I mean, I've been in education almost 20 years, and it seems like a blink of an eye. I mean, I feel like it was just only yesterday that I was in those schools, and now it's like, and that's how quickly it goes. But I think it's also why I have a sense of urgency that, we all want to live a big, full, long life. But the reality is, every minute that you get is so significant. And if you can either use it to benefit others and really serve with every minute you have and feel really good about that, or you can kind of serve yourself. And for me, that's kind of been the charge of, being surrounded by family that is motivated by the same thing, that we really want to help our community, that it's okay to work hard, but it's a lot easier to work hard when you know that what you're doing is benefiting other people. It's very fulfilling to do that. So
you eventually made your way to James Stevens International Academy, principal there, and that school was failing and it was on the verge of being shut down.
Shut down. That's right.
So it was an F school, and I came out and did a story on it. That's what led you to be named Principal of the Year.
Yeah.
So if you can go to our YouTube channel and just look for the James Stevens story. It was probably about a year and a half ago now.
A couple years. Yeah.
So you went you helped bring it from an F to an A or a B school in 1 year.
That's right. Well, it wasn't me. As you know, that was a team. It was,
sorry, yeah.
It was part of a great team of people.
And that's what I like about you, because you never forget to give credit to your team as well. So how did you guys do that? How'd you make that happen?
Well, just as I kind of said, I'm not saying it to be nice. I'm saying it because it really is the truth. That's one of the great things about education that, when I was kind of coming up through the ranks, through schooling of my own and everything else professionally, a lot of times, like as a coach too, like a lot of what you do is a product of yourself, your work, your ideas, your strategy. In education, or when you get to really complex challenges, it's no longer possible to do it all by yourself. That's what I love about big organizational challenges is that, it's never just you when you get to a complex enough challenge. It now becomes a group of you or, and all the systems you put in place. And I think because it makes it harder, it makes it more fulfilling when you achieve, right? And it whereas, an individual accolade is nice. You can put a trophy on the wall or whatever. You can tell stories about it. But being Principal of the Year to me was more of a tribute of the ethos that, that I stood for and the people that I had the privilege of working with stood for. So to give you Kelly Stedman, who's still the principal there, it's a great point of pride for me that I had the chance to go there with her and with the team that was there, and that some of those folks are still there, not just building on our success, but surpassing what we did initially, and that, because that ultimately is the true test. You really don't want to have a flash in the pan where you succeed and then the school goes back to an FOD again, because then you're really harming those kids in the community by not building the sustainability. And that's a big part of my current role now, is that sustainability concept.
Yeah, it's got the word right in
That's
your
right.
title.
That's right. And our superintendent, has that vision. Here's the reality. Our superintendent could retire tomorrow if he wanted. He could, if he chose to do it. And that means that every day we have him, it's because he chooses it, because he wants to do exactly what he's doing and he believes in what we're doing. But he wants the success of our district to move beyond him. He doesn't want it to be something where when he leaves one day that the school district falls apart. To him and to me, and this is one of the reasons why I believe and support him so strongly, is that if it's about the person individually, you've really lost the point. The goal isn't about us. The goal is about, the mission of what we're trying to do. And in order to do that, you have to lead yourself out of a job. You have to build the capacity of others. You have to recognize that we have more than enough talent around us. It's just our people in the seat on the bus where they can best contribute and can be developed and grown to achieve their destiny and their potential. And that's your job as a leader, is not to, direct attention back to yourself, but to figure out, okay, what are the things we can put in place to actually build up all the people around us to achieve their dreams and to achieve their best ability to serve and give. Find those win-wins. And I think that's something that it's been a great opportunity. And, the James Stevens piece was one of the most gratifying professional and personal things I ever got to do that year. And those people, the team, just phenomenal. All of us coming together in really a very high pressure situation. You have, for 7 consecutive years, the lowest or second lowest performing school of the 100 schools in Lee County. That's how consistently underperforming the school was. And the reality was they just were really a byproduct of poverty and things like that. You had an at-risk community being served and, just having a hard time getting people to come there. And so it was a real privilege that when I was given the opportunity, that the people who joined me on that journey were more than willing to put, to some cases, they left the school where their children attended. They left jobs that were very close to their homes to drive further, to fight that traffic, which we know in Lee County all too well. And yet the thing that I sold them on, a lot of cases, it wasn't even money. They didn't make any additional monetary rewards for going to these schools. But the thing that I would say is, I promise you, you will remember this for the rest of your life. And I can assure you they all will. Being a part of a team where you look around and you see the people that are better than you in certain ways, and that you are able to contribute in a way that's very organic, there's just nothing like it. Mm-hmm. And now as a district leader, I get to try to look for those same synergies and things, and it's a pretty awesome experience.
I know so part of what you did was you lengthened the school day.
That's right.
A little bit, and fed the students an extra meal per day,
right,
I think, because of the longer day. Mm-hmm. So yeah, how did that feel? When you saw like that letter grade, did you kind of see that the progression throughout the year? Like I can tell that we're getting better, and
we knew in October. We could tell. It's funny. The first month or so, you do kind of wonder, oh boy, have we bitten off more than we can chew? This is such a hard challenge. Do we really? But it just takes time. Mm-hmm. You're bringing everyone back to school. It's kind of a transitional time in schools when you have kids who have been off for the summer and all of a sudden they're back. So you have to kind of get everybody on the same page in terms of the culture. And really all we were doing was turning what was a very dysfunctional environment into not just a normal school, but a high-performing institution where really the expectations are high, the quality of the teaching staff is extremely high, the dedication of the assistants, the paraprofessionals and whatnot was high, and the support was high. Not just like the food is a good example of that. No one can learn if they're starving.
Yeah.
If you're hungry and you're hurting because your body is hurting from hunger pains, there's no food in your house, you just can't learn. You don't care about math. You just don't care, because you just want
my
food.
wife. I can't do anything if I'm hungry.
Right? So imagine that if you go home on the weekend, you don't eat anything. There's no food or very little food, and you're competing as a small child, the older kids or whoever. This sounds like I'm not trying to pull at the heartstrings. I'm just saying this is very genuine. It's very real. And, so for me, it was a non-negotiable that I had to come up with a strategy to offset the basic needs not being met. And that meant a longer day as a win-win because we didn't just beat kids with more books. We had them, now all kids got a longer period of physical athletic activity. So they got to use some of the energy they had. We fed them 4 meals a day, breakfast, a snack during the mid-morning, lunch, and dinner, supper. And of course, if they have food at home, that's great too. But I mean, those kids they wolfed it down. I mean, so then it was very obvious that our kids needed more food. And so just by taking that and making that equitable so that all of our kids got that additional benefit, that allowed kids to actually focus on learning and the teachers to focus on learning and not have to trying to teach through that somehow. So it was one strategy among many others. One of the big things that we did really was invest in our teachers. We knew that teachers needed planning time, and that was a way to do it. We gave them more planning time because we had the kids for a longer period of day. It allowed us to give our teachers more planning time during the day, consolidated time, where they could actually engage in the more heavy lift of improving their lesson plans and things like that, as opposed to at a lot of schools where they may get a half an hour really after they've gone to the bathroom and things like that. That's not really professional time. So we really invested in all sides, the kids, the adults. We did all the things we could think of to move the needle and allow that initial success to kind of build the momentum, and it succeeded.
Well, congratulations, big accomplishment. And I know your wife works here at the district as well. Or is it Rebecca?
That's right. There's
Okay,
two
I'm glad I got that
Rebeccas, right? So my brother's wife is Rebecca, and my wife's Rebecca, and we all work in the school system. My wife Rebecca, and it's so interesting. You talk about the passion I have for equity and things like that. Well, she is probably even more so. And so it really is a family mission. And, we have two little ones now. I have a twin boy and a girl. They're 2.5. It's a Ruby Lorraine and Jack Dean Savage. And it's been interesting having my kids now because, for all those years I took care of other people's kids, and now I have my own kids. And there are so many things now that make sense to me. The urgency of education, not just in the social equity standpoint, but in a personal way, that now I really understand that I want this school system to be the very best it can be because my kids are going to be in it soon. Mm-hmm. And I expect, my nephews and nieces are already in it, but if you're going to be ready for the Savage children, we still have some work to do. And so it makes it very personal. So whatever, and I used to say as a principal, I will not put a child in a classroom that I would not put my own child or my niece or nephew in. I used to say that. Now, of course, I didn't have any children, so it's convenient to say that. But now I can legitimately say it. And it allowed me, I think, to confront when teachers were maybe not doing all that they could. It forced me to be able to say that to them. I had to. In my mind, that was the obligation. That was the trust that parents put in me was, hey, I'm trusting you with my child. That's the most precious thing in the world to me. You, as the principal, need to make sure the people that are interacting with my child are of a certain caliber that you would put your own child in. And that became a very easy litmus for me to say, you know what, that's an appropriate standard. Well, now that I actually have children, it's gone to a whole other level. And so I just realized that there's so much being asked of us now, and I'm excited for the challenge.
All right, well, we'll have to get your wife on a podcast at some time.
You just wait. You'll be blown away. She's really impressive. I promise.
Rebecca, if you're listening, we'll get you on here at some point. All right. So we kind of end each episode with kind of rapid fire questions.
Oh.
I don't know how much you prepared.
All right,
I don't think I let you know about this ahead of time. But what is your favorite book?
Oh, man. Yeah, you're going to think this is boring, but John Kotter's 8 Stages of Change, basically, it's had various iterations. I know, but it's organizational change, and I'm telling you, it's so powerful. It's a business book. He was the dean of the Harvard Business School, but I'm telling you, every single bit of what he wrote, it applies to educational leadership too, and organizational leadership. So,
all right,
my favorite book.
8 Stages of Change.
Mm-hmm. Well, he said different. It's been called different things, but basically, he has 8 stages of change, and the books have been called different things.
Okay, so if people want to find that book, that might
just
have
type in
different
John
titles.
Kotter 8 Stages of Change. You'll get it. I promise. It's just they I think what they do is they change the name each year so they can sell more of them. But a lot of the content remains the same. But I promise you, it's a worth a read if you're into organizational leadership.
Sneaky. Okay. What is your favorite film school guy? What's your favorite movie or TV show?
Oh my God, that is so hard.
You can name a couple if you want.
All right. Oh man.
Take your time. We can edit this long pause out if we need to.
Well, I really enjoyed two shows that I really enjoyed, which I know everybody probably enjoys, but I enjoyed House of Cards. I think is just very instructive, and I really enjoyed. Oh God, what is it called? It's on HBO.
Game of Thrones.
Game of Thrones.
Yeah.
Thank you. I really love like HBO's programming. Like there's pretty much everything that comes through there. I just watch those shows over time, the premium stuff.
Did you
just
see
love it.
Chernobyl?
Oh, I did. Chernobyl is incredible.
Yeah, really
Yeah.
good.
I mean, I just love that programming. It's
Yeah.
like, to me, those shows are a cut above even movies now because they allow you to really explore
Yeah.
and go more in depth.
I've heard, a lot of people are saying like, a lot of people say the golden age of television was a long time ago, but a lot of people think it's right now.
I think so.
Because of the long miniseries and like HBO drama series and like Breaking Bad and
Oh, there's
and
so
all
many.
that.
I mean, I can't even tell you like the HBO stuff. And we watch them mostly on streaming now. So like most of the shows I would say I watch with my wife. So we watch them together, and it's just like wow, you can't even beat it. It's
Well, and
just so
movies are kind of dying a little bit because you think about what are the things that everybody talks about, and it's mostly TV shows these days. Like, oh, did you see the last episode of Game of Thrones, or did you check out the new season of Stranger Things or whatever?
Yeah, Stranger Things. Too,
A lot of people don't talk about movies that much anymore
That's a
unless
good
it's like a
point.
big Marvel movie or something.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. What did you think about the finale
Of Game of Thrones?
Because I did not like it.
Yeah, I think a lot of people didn't like it. I think it's really hard to take, an in-depth series like that it could move so slowly over so many seasons, and you really get to know the various characters,
And then
they
you
all-
just rush it.
Yeah, and that's the part I think probably is unsatisfying for people, and they don't, especially some of them you want to see, certain characters end up together and things like that. For those people who haven't seen them yet and are going to be watching it years, in the future, I don't want to spoil anything, but it's so true. Like, it did feel rushed. It didn't always feel like we have our own. It's one of the things that's kind of unique. We have our own kind of personal conceptions of characters, and we kind of connect to them. And so when they do something that we don't think they would do in our conception of them, but maybe the writer's conception of them, it can create an emotional, volatile reaction. So I think a lot of people were pretty upset with the ending, but I kind of, I figured it was a hard thing to pull together.
I don't think a lot of people flock to the Lee Schools TV podcast for their Game of Thrones recap. So I don't know how much we'd actually be spoiling. But yeah, I was disappointed. But it was, it was probably one of my top 3 favorite shows ever. So, who's your favorite musical artist or favorite song?
Gosh, I it's really sad, but I love music, like all different kinds of genres. I just really love music in general. Not necessarily for the lyrics and words, but like the melodic sounds of it and things like that.
Same,
but
How it makes
the
you
one
feel.
who's I think for me, I just love I turn it up loud. I'm in the car, especially when I'm by myself. When I'm driving with my family, I have to keep it low, and so I don't really get to enjoy it the way I like. But a voice right now that I just like love, and it's probably all edited and whatnot, is Halsey's voice.
Oh, yeah.
Halsey, she's like a female artist right now, and I just like every single song she sings. It just feels so visceral, and like I love I get like a feeling listening to it.
She's got a unique voice, unique sound.
And I've heard her sing, over the television, broadcast. So I know that it's not all just edited, but I just that's an artist who currently right now I just love listening to that voice. So,
so growing up, I'm sure you didn't get to film school until college, but what was your favorite subject in school, growing up?
I really loved all the subjects. I like to learn. I think that's just kind of part of them.
Pick one.
I know. Well, maybe I wouldn't say that I really enjoyed it in school, but like science to me is super fascinating. Like just an understanding of all the things in the universe, things that are, that don't change, things that we just gain deeper and deeper insight to over time. So I think science is my most fascinating subject, but I would not say that I loved it in school. I felt like a lot of it was worksheets and memorizing key terms, whereas as I get older, I just love reading about science and things and understanding complex, scientific thoughts. And like Albert Einstein to me is like one of the most fascinating people. I love to read stuff that he's written, journals and things like that. I just love that kind of stuff. So,
I don't know if you just answered this next question with Albert Einstein, but if you could have dinner with anyone living or dead, who would it be and why?
oh my God.
Okay, you can't
Can I
say
pick
you
two?
can't say Albert Einstein.
Okay, so
Sure,
since I already like him, I'd love to talk to someone like Abraham Lincoln. To me, because I think the synthesis of kind of the social issue that he had to tackle at the time, and maybe didn't have to tackle, but chose to tackle, and the context that he had to operate in, being in a political environment where you have a really divided nation, and yet you have these kind of moral conundrums that must be addressed. To me, I just think to hear how he approached what he did and so forth, like, I just think that would be, you think about what happened in that time and think about how different the world would be had that not happened when it did, because you're dealing with economic issues, which from a country's landscape are so big, but you're dealing really with just human issues. And so to me, if I could have dinner with anybody, it would probably be him. But Albert Einstein too, just because I'd want to pick his brain. And he was very humble. His brilliant, Albert Einstein might have been the most brilliant mind we've ever had, possibly. Certainly, some of the theories and things he came up with have come. We're actually discovering now some of the theories he had years ago that they couldn't prove. We're actually proving now. So he had, he was really forward thinking. So from a cognitive standpoint, you have that, but from like a moral and just from a kind of, because I see the parallels with education and what we do, I would say Abraham Lincoln.
All right, very cool. All right, well, Ken Savage, Executive Director for Strategic Sustainability and Governance. I'm getting pretty good at getting that out. Yeah.
Better than I am, Adam.
Well, thank you so much for stopping by and being the first guest of our second season of the Elite Schools TV podcast.
Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. All right, and thank you for watching and listening. See you next time.